We'll squeeze a little more juice out of that PK intro video. Welcome back to On Texas Football, everybody. Special live edition of On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel on the road. Wrapped up Steve Sarkisian's press conference. This was kind of an impromptu press conference. We just found out about it yesterday, talking about the hire Will Muschamp, Pete Kwiatkowski out, Dwayne Akina out, talking about the hiring of Jabbar Jaluk as the running backs coach. So a lot of ground to cover from Sark today in about a half hour to 40 minutes. We'll get to that, get to your questions, super chats, obviously, as always, jump to the front of the line. We'll tell you more about our sponsor here for this edition of On Texas Football later in the show. That's our friends over at Advanced Pain Care. We want to thank them for sponsoring this. But CJ, I'll let you get right to it, man. Your initial thoughts before we get into some of the kind of hot ticket items from the press conference. Just your initial thoughts from what Sark had to say today.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm still fighting the wind a little bit here, but no, a total surprise for me. And if this gets too bad, let me know. I'll hop in the car. But still a total surprise to me as to when this move was made, when obviously it was announced. Sark talking to us, trying to basically explain why the move was made. Ultimately, in my eyes, it was a move that he wanted to make a few years ago. On top of that, it was, hey, I think this is the style of football that is required and necessary to win in the SEC. That is why it was made. Ultimately, we'll talk about that, Jeff, because, look, I don't think the defense was necessarily the issue over the last few years. But if this is an upgrade in Steve Sarkisian's eyes, and it's a way that Texas can find equal footing with that of Ohio State and Georgia, then it's a move that he felt was needed to be made. And now that he had made it, I'm excited to see what's next for Will Muschamp at Texas.
Yeah. And this is not me putting words in Sark's mouth. He said this today. He felt like the offense toward the end of the season was trending in the right direction, at least going in a direction that he liked. He didn't feel the same way about the defense. And look, we can point to those games, right? Like, Mississippi State was a mess. The end of the Vanderbilt game was a mess. Arkansas wasn't great. I don't know that warranted the change. But I'm not the head coach of Texas. I don't make those decisions. Sark makes those decisions. And, Sark talks a lot about complimentary football, and we'll get into the cut right here, a cut from the press conference. And, again, thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for putting this together. This is Sark talking about why he hired Will Muschamp, and basically it goes down to two things. One, kind of jives with his style of football, what Sark believes in, and Sark feels this is going to help Texas against the top teams in the SEC. So this is what a part of what Sark had to say today.
I think that in our conference, the more you evaluate this league and the more you look at, if you really want to have elite success, you got to play a little bit more in your face. The line of scrimmage is so physical, and the idea that you're going to add hats to that box. The quarterback play is at a high level, and you've got elite players on the perimeter that if you're giving up free access type throws, it can get hard, and now you start getting taxed in different ways. And so if we can minimize the run game with a level of physicality at the line of scrimmage and minimize the free access throws and making people earn it and making quarterbacks hold the ball and affecting the quarterback is something that you're going to have to do to beat the upper echelon teams in our league and do it on a consistent basis was something that was attractive to me. I do think there's a mentality you have to have in playing defense in this league, and we did it at a high level. Don't get me wrong, we did it at a very high level, and a credit to all those guys that done it. But I think to get to where we want to go, and to beat some of those, those top 4 or 5 teams in the country right now, there's a style of which that you have to play, and you have to do it against the best. It's not about doing it against kind of the teams down here. It's those upper echelon teams, and I think we've recruited well, and we're going to try to continue to recruit at a high level, and we've got our own gaps and things that we're going to try to fill in through the portal, and try to get the personnel to really fit what Will's looking for. But I do think there's a style that I believe in, that I've grown up understanding, that is needed to beat some of these upper echelon teams and to do it at a high level.
CJ, I'm going to make an assumption here, and I'll let you run with it, give your thoughts. And I'll borrow a term from our colleague Rod Babers. It's multifactorial when you look at Sark made this change. And to me,
I have. Go ahead.
We're having some technical difficulties right now. I'm not sure if it's on CJ's end or on my end. I'm
good.
Folks, I apologize for the delay. We'll go ahead and get that straightened out. CJ Vogel will be back with us here in a moment. Okay. Yeah. Matthew, if you can hear me, just pop CJ back up on the screen when it's ready. But, to me, this is multifactorial why Sark did this. And if we go to the comments, Sailor Joe, I think, said it best. He said, I completely understand the change. Like to have someone who's on the same page as you, someone who knows how to operate a defense and has head coaching experience, but back down as a DC position. Great. Yeah. So, again, this is me making an assumption. I'm going to make an assumption. I just think at the end of the day, I don't think Sark trusted PK to take the defense in the direction that he wanted to take it. And that's why you make the change. And he said it today. Look, he knows how important this year is. Obviously, this year's critical. We talked here on the channel about the all-in mentality that Texas has. And, part of that is, hey, Sark devoting as much time as he can to the offense. So, CJ, we'll get back to it. I'm assuming that Sark, at the end of the day, didn't trust PK to take the defense in the direction that he felt it needed to go for him to devote as much time as he needs to on offense. In other words, I don't think he wanted to be looking over his shoulder, wondering if the defensive coordinator and him are on the same page in terms of how they view football.
Yeah, and again, that's pretty interesting to me because the defense hadn't been an issue over the last couple of years. I guess the second half of this year was the straw that broke the camel's back there. But look, I mean, again, you were a top 30 defense in scoring defense the last 4 years. It's a pretty good run. You were a top 3 team in 2024. You obviously go to the college football playoff. You had made the leap to elite level defenses. You were in the top 10 once again midway through 2025. Oklahoma hasn't scored a touchdown on you in 2 years, right? The defense had been looking pretty solid. There was one line in particular that really stood out to me. And Sarkisian as an offensive guy, it's his play calling, and beyond that, it's the relationship and the development with his quarterback. And what I took away from this press conference today is something that I don't think I've ever really seen from Sark, and it's when the defense is on the field, Jeff, when do you see Sark ever go sit with his quarterback and diagnose what he's seeing on the field? When do you see him breaking down with the iPad and trying to see what he is, basically understanding what he is going through on the field? It hasn't necessarily been what he's relied on doing, and that's why AJ Milwee and Coach Bemonte have been tasked with doing on Texas. But my point is that should also be the case for the head coach to go sit with his quarterback and kind of diagnose the next step for his quarterback and his offense. I think with the addition of Will Muschamp, it will allow that freedom for Sarkisian to look at his offense and say, okay, now all I need to worry about is this offense, rather than, do I need to call a timeout? Is the personnel right? What's the down and distance for potentially coming with a fake? Do we see Jeff Banks' role increase as well with the special teams? That's going to be interesting. But I think more than anything, it's just, hey, one more thing off my plate to get the offense right after what we would consider to be a down year.
Let's go to the super chat. Josh Manning, thank you for the super chat. Said, Jeff, do you actually believe that Sark spent too much time with the defense? Look, I'm not saying I agree with Sark with this move. I'm as much of a Will Muschamp guy as you will find in this market. I'm a firm believer in Will Muschamp, but I don't think sacrificing PK was necessarily the right move. If you're going to say, hey, what do you need to do to get this thing on the right page? I don't necessarily think that was it. I'm just telling it to you from the way I am rationalizing it, trying to get inside Sark's mind, trying to figure out why he did it. No, I don't think Sark was spending most of his time in the defensive meeting room. I think that's disingenuous and, quite frankly, asinine to think that he's doing that. I think it boiled down to a trust factor. And look, Sark talked about from the minute he got here, wanted to be sticky in man coverage, wanted to be aggressive. We're about, an attack mentality. That's not the way Pete Kwiatkowski approaches defense. And that's not to say that that's a bad way, because it worked really well for Texas. But again, like we talked about, to get to the next level, for this team to get over the hump and to ascend to another level, which is playing for a national championship, winning an SEC championship, I think Sark felt like there needed to be changes. We'll get to the offensive part of that here in just a minute. But CJ, I will reiterate, I want to get your thoughts on this too. I wrote this morning over on ontexasfootball.com. This isn't guaranteed to work. Like, this isn't just rubber stamp it, boom, Texas is in the national semifinals next year. There's still some nuance here. But again, I think the overriding theme is, through 5 years, the organization as it was got Texas to a certain point. And I think Sark felt like it's tapped out to get to the next level, to go beyond this. We got to make some changes.
Yeah, and again, putting myself in the shoes of Steve Sarkisian and again, trying to understand and perhaps even justify why the move was made. I go back to just exactly the point I was trying to make. If it allows Steve Sarkisian to focus more time on his offense, to right that ship, to get the pieces in a line, to create a game plan that exploits that of the defense, it's a great move. If there was reasons for Steve Sarkisian's attention to be brought away from the offense a year ago or the last couple of years as a result of his defensive coordinator, then the move probably needed to be made. And again, we go back, I've heard Jerry Hamilton talk about this. Jeff, I know you mentioned it, but this was a conversation that Steve Sarkisian had with Will Muschamp in 2021 when he had this job. Unfortunately, the timing did not align. Now that the timing aligns, he said, look, this is the guy that I believe is one of the better minds in all of college football when it comes to coaching, installing, and developing defenses. And to win in the SEC, it's his style of play that he believes ultimately gives you the best chance to do exactly that.
We'll go ahead and get to actually, before we get to a comment and get to the offensive side of this, I do want to run down kind of some big ticket items that got discussed during the press conference. One, Will Muschamp will not coach with Texas in the bowl game. Now, he was in the building yesterday. Sark said he's already started talking to players, trying to build some relationships. So he's around the program, but he won't coach in the bowl game. Johnny Nansen will call the defense in the bowl game. Jabbar Jaluk, on the other hand, has been with Texas on the practice field. He will actually be a part of the on-field coaching staff for the bowl game. So there's that. Are other changes to the staff coming? CJ, I'll let you get into that here in just a sec because you had something this afternoon over at ontexasfootball.com. But I don't think before the bowl game anything is going to happen at this point, and Sark didn't allude to any other staff changes. He did say Will Muschamp will initially work with the secondary when he takes over on a full-time basis. So does that mean you're not going to bring in the safeties coach? What does that mean for Johnny Nansen at the linebackers coach position? I don't know. I think they'll get through the bowl game, figure some of that out. I think Will Muschamp's going to have some of his guys, whoever he deems his guys are, he's going to have some of those. I did think it was interesting, though, that Sark did bring up that, hey, Mark Orfe was a graduate assistant at South Carolina under Will Muschamp. So there's at least a little bit of continuity there. And then I think there's the tie with Muschamp and Pete Jenkins and Kenny Baker and Nick Saban, like all that stuff kind of ties together. So Muschamp doesn't have to make very many phone calls to figure out if Kenny Baker's a guy that deserves a place on his staff. I feel like of all the guys on the defensive staff, I think Kenny Baker's going to be fine. That's just my assumption. As far as changes on the offensive side, and CJ, I'll let you take it from here. I don't think if anything is going to change on offense, I don't think it's going to be before the bowl game.
I think we're going to get through the bowl game. I think we're going to basically get to the very beginning of the transfer portal window before seeing any additional changes. Of course, we've talked about it a little bit. Jabbar Jaluk coming in. One, Jeff, I think that's very valuable that Sark even mentioned that the younger running backs have had that time to grow into that developmental mode with Jaluk before the Michigan game. For Michael Terry, of course, that's huge. For Christian Clark, for James Simon, massive for the two of them as well. But going back, and look, I'll talk a little bit about Chris Jackson because his contract expires at the end of the year. I published earlier today, I expect that Texas and Chris Jackson to go separate way. I don't believe that they'll be reuniting when his contract expires, but we'll have to, of course, wait and see what Steve Sarkisian wants to do. If anything, this week has shown us, Jeff, surprises can come at any time when it comes to filling out his coaching staff. But altogether, it's going to be interesting what Muschamp does on his side of the football. I think you're right. I think Kenny Baker, I think Alan Clark this year have earned the right to return regardless of who, might be available for a Texas position coach. But what's going to be interesting is the linebacking unit, right? I singled out Johnny Nansen saying, hey, I don't know what the relationship is between he and Muschamp. I figure Muschamp would want to have that instant connection with whoever's wearing the green dot to kind of run the offense from the quarterback of the defense perspective. If that's the case, I don't know what the future entails for Johnny Nansen. But altogether, I know that there are a few positions that they're going to have to address. And once that comes, it will probably be after the bowl game.
Yeah, one other thing that I think is worth mentioning, Sark was at, and I'll say this too. The two big things I took away from this press conference as positives were things that going into the bowl game, when we found out for sure that Texas wasn't going to be in the college football playoff, two things that I hoped would happen happened. One, Sark used, I think he said about the first 6 or 7 bowl practices as strictly developmental practices. The guys that didn't get a lot of run during the season got to work. And he mentioned pretty much you name a young guy, CJ, that didn't play much this year, they pretty much got mentioned by Sark as a guy who took advantage of it. Christian Clark, you already mentioned the running backs, Christian Clark, James Simon. He mentioned Khalil Lockett, Jamie French, Emery Winston, Bo Barnes on defense. Also mentioned Michael Terry as a guy that's taking advantage. He's at running back right now. So a lot of those young guys that you're looking forward to, Josiah Sharma, Myron Charles. So a lot of the young guys that we haven't heard from this year took advantage of those practices. I love that Sark did that. But in the same vein of the Muschamp hire, I mentioned this and I talked about it, and I was hoping Sark would do this. You look at the way the last couple of years have gone, especially like from the 24 season going into 25, you never really got a break because, you lost the Cotton Bowl and it's like, okay, you lose that game on a Friday. I said on Monday, do you just start like off season? Like it just kind of runs together. Sark never really had time to do the 10,000 foot audit as he described it today. And when you do that, you got to look, you're at a critical point in your tenure where you're in year 5 going into year 6. Some things have got to change. You don't want the message to get stale. Continuity has been a good thing, but maybe it's not best for this program. Maybe you do have to make some changes. And CJ, that brings me to the offense. And I think this goes back to something you mentioned. Allen Collins says, so PK gets canned for performance, but Flood is still on the staff. I don't think PK got canned for performance. I think PK got canned because I just think philosophically it was no longer compatible with where Sark wanted to go. And again, let me say, I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm just telling you, I'm thinking this is why Sark did it based on what I've heard, what we know, what we've been able to put together, reading the tea leaves, what Sark said today. I don't think it was performance, CJ. I think that would be short misguided. It was just philosophically there wasn't a match anymore, and Sark didn't like the way it was trending.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Jeff. Look, again, what are we doing? Right? It surely is what I'm trying to say. The defense against side of the football for the last 3 seasons, I didn't think would be the thing.
Yeah, we got some audio difficulties with CJ. We'll get him squared up. But again, it's not performance. It's just philosophically it didn't align. And as we get CJ back, I'll say this about the offense. We can talk all we want, and the royal we, us here on the channel and everybody on the chat and everybody on the message board over on ontexasfootball.com, everybody on social media, you can talk all you want about, hey, Sark needs to make changes to the offensive staff. Sark needs to hire a play caller. You can talk about that till you're blue in the face. It's not going to happen. He's not going to turn this offense over. And at this point, similar to, hey, if you want to get this thing to the next level, you need to get a defensive coordinator that more aligns with your style of football. On offense, I think Sark is looking at it from this standpoint. You're going into your last year with Arch Manning. If it's going to work out with Arch Manning, it's going to be Sark calling the plays. If it doesn't work out with Arch Manning, Sark is going to be solely responsible. It doesn't matter if you bring an offensive coordinator or not. Everybody, the buck stops with Sark. So I think the way Sark, when we talk about an all-in mentality, I think Sark wants to do his best, put himself in the best possible position to give Arch Manning in this offense a chance to thrive in 2026. And his answer to that, it's not going to be hiring a play caller, because until he gets it completely out of his system, that's not going to happen. You can debate it all day, but to me, it's just wasted brain matter. Like, it's not going to happen. He's not going to do it until he gets it all out of his system, and that's not going to be in 2026. So, CJ, as we bring you back in here, that's my point with the offense. We can talk about staff changes or whatever we want, but Sark's idea of going all in, he said, hey, either we're going to get to where we want to be with me calling the plays, with Arch Manning at quarterback, or it's going to crash and burn with Arch Manning at quarterback and me calling the plays.
No, I'm just kidding. I think I'm playing. I got you. Hopefully you can hear me now, Jeff. Chat, I'm really sorry about this. But I did want to play a little joke there. Hopefully someone laughed. Point being, I'm with you, Jeff. It shouldn't be for performance with PK. And again, moving towards the offense, I still think change is coming. What does that mean? Well, we'll have to wait and see until after the bowl game. The big thing for me is, look, when you talk about going all in, when you talk about constructing the best staff, building the best possible roster, finding a way to get back towards the college football playoff and ultimately winning that national championship that has eluded Texas over the last 3 years, this is a step in the direction that will allow Steve Sarkisian, in his eyes, to be more hands-on than he ever has been, knowing that he can basically look at Will Muschamp and call him, quote, the head coach of the defense. I don't need to worry anymore about what timeouts I need to spend, what personnel we're using. And again, I know I'm kind of rehashing a little bit of what we already talked about, Jeff, but if that gives Sark even an inkling more time with the offense to figure out what is best for this team, it's a step in the right direction based off of what we've seen over the last couple of seasons. So that's where I am again. And look, it is a risk. We've talked about it. We'll continue to address it all the way throughout the year. But the one thing I know, and the one thing that you know, Jeff, is Will Muschamp, with talent, is a very dangerous defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and look, does Will Muschamp have the best track record as a head coach? No, he doesn't. He's been a head coach at 2 SEC schools. He's been fired from 2 SEC schools and kind of middle of the road results. But if you're talking about guys in college football in the last, basically since the turn of the millennium, hey, who's been the best defensive play callers in college football? Man, you don't need all the fingers on one hand before you get to Will Muschamp. Like, it's Muschamp, Kirby Smart. I'd put Brent Venables in there, say what you want about him, but he's in that mix. There's a handful of other guys, but Will Muschamp is in that group. And it's not like, he was playing tiddlywinks in the coaching office when he was the co-DC at Georgia. I mean, he's working with the safeties. He's on the field. He's basically right there. Glenn Schumann called the defense, but you don't think Will Muschamp was in his ear? And you don't think Kirby Smart was in his ear? And you don't think those two guys had a lot of influence on the way the Georgia defense ran? No, they did 100%. So it's not like he's been sitting out and he's completely unaware of what's going on. Like, I don't know that there's anybody, CJ, that's maybe more passionate about football in the SEC than Will Muschamp. I'm sure there are, but this guy lives and breathes for SEC football, period, point blank, end of story. That's one of the reasons why he didn't want to wait for the head coach and waiting opportunity to open at Texas. The Florida job's open. Boom. It's a premier job in the SEC. I'm leaving. I'm taking it. Will Muschamp's about as much of an SEC guy as there is.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that bodes very well for what we've seen this conference turn into, right? It's no longer super defensively led, right? A lot of these high-end coaches are very offensive based. And, I know Jerry's mentioned Lane Kiffin. Look, you got to look around at who else are starting to move into higher, positions of strength. Kalen DeBoer is one that Texas will come across over the next couple of seasons. There's a lot of talent on both rosters. So when you look at how this conference has continued to evolve and offense becoming more centric based as well, you go get yourself who's someone familiar with the style of play that's successful, as well as the familiarity with a number of coaches and teams already in the conference. I think that's massive.
Yeah, because this goes back to a point, and again, I'll lean on Rod Babers because Rod knows more football than I've forgotten. Sometimes as a coordinator, as a play caller, you got to play the man, not the hand. The situation may dictate, hey, we need to be in this front with this blitz and this coverage, but knowing, hey, that's what conventional football tells you. How Lane Kiffin attacks a certain situation, though, or how Josh Heupel attacks a certain situation may be completely different than what the conventional wisdom tells you. And that's where you need a defensive coordinator to be able to read the room, read the situation, and react accordingly. And again, granted, he hasn't been at Texas in 15 years, but in terms of a defensive mind that can call it on the fly, that can make adjustments, that's great at game planning, can put guys into a position to succeed, I haven't seen anybody better at Texas than Will Muschamp. I've seen very few in the country as good as Will Muschamp. And CJ, this is another thing that I think Will Muschamp will help do. And I think Jabbar Jaloop, because Sark talked about the juice he's brought to the program too. I think this is where we talk about that issue with the penalties, right? This has been, you can call it what it is. This was one of the most undisciplined teams in the country this last season. You're the worst in the FBS in penalties per game. You're, I think, bottom quarter in the FBS in penalty yards per game. Well, you want to talk about detail-oriented football, attention to detail? That's one of the things where Will Muschamp thrives, is attention to detail and detail-oriented football.
If there's one question, and I tried to base it off of this, but if there's one more question I could have asked Sark today, it would have been based off of your communication and your history of just watching from afar or whatever your relationship was with Will Muschamp beforehand. How do you expect penalties to change, Jeff? And I wish I got to ask that question today. I did ask him about the sideline intensity, because the viral clips of Will Muschamp over the last, 15 years, what's the common theme there? It's kind of that mean-eyed, kind of mean mug intensity in your face. Hey, I'm going to coach you, but it's going to be through love. It's going to be through that connection that we've built. But boy, you better bring it every single day. And if you don't, I'm going to find somebody that does. I don't think you're going to see kind of those undisciplined penalties rear their ugly head on the defensive side of the ball next year, because I don't think Will Muschamp, knowing what I know of his coaching style over the last 10 plus years, Jeff, that's not going to fly for him. So I did ask Sark about the intensity, what he expects, and what attracted him to that level of coaching, or to that style of coaching on that side of the football. And he said, look, I know that I'm going to look over and his side of the ball is going to be in line, and that style of what he brings and that energy and that passion, that's going to triculate. But it's all going to be through love, right? That hard, tough-nosed coaching is going to be through the connection that he builds with and his players. And I've heard from a number of players through social media. I know Emmanuel Lacho's talked about it. Rashad Bobineau was on Coffee and Football earlier today. We've seen, a couple of players chime in through Twitter as well, saying, no one has coached me harder while knowing more, while being harder on me, and more loving and caring than Will Muschamp. And I think that's something that wasn't always active on the Texas sideline. I think on both sides of the ball. So if at least one side, the side that probably needs as much juice than any, gets that, I think it's a plus for Texas.
And I think the byproduct too, look, Sark has made some changes. And like we said, there are going to be probably more changes on this staff before the dust settles. But, part of the thing, I think one thing that really sticks in Sark's craw, whether he'll ever admit it publicly or not, it's got to hurt when Kirby Smart calls you out for not being a physical football program. Yes. And you're going to have to put your money where your mouth is, literally, when the portal opens to get this offensive line fixed. Look, we can talk about Kyle Flood as an offensive line coach all we want. It was offensive line personnel. Now, was some of that on him? Absolutely. Was it on Sark? Absolutely. They just miscalculated what they had. But you can't go into another season with the offensive line in the shape it was in, so you're going to have to address it in the portal. But that's the other thing, CJ. He was asked about kind of cracking the Kirby Smart to Georgia code, but I think, you have enough live periods in practice against the Will Muschamp defense. That will be a case of iron sharpens iron. If you're not physical, if you're not tough, if you're not mentally tough, to go again in a red zone lockout period against the Will Muschamp defense, your life is going to be miserable during spring practice.
Yeah, I know that Texas goes through one-on-ones and, the secondary and wide receivers, right? I know that they play some, quarter or split field 7-on-7, some full field 7-on-7. But that's all for the most part in Pete Kwiatkowski's defense, which, as we've talked about, it's loose. Sark mentioned today, he's like, if you allow easy access throws, that wears on the team. It becomes taxing. Well, that also becomes taxing for the offense, because guess what? You don't always get a full year of whenever you then go face an Ohio State or Georgia. It's that same level of intensity or player that's going to be in your face, and that's going to change. So Texas will get the best of both worlds, offensively and defensively, starting obviously in the spring when these two sides of the football start playing against one another. And we talk about it, Jeff. How exciting will it be when we start hearing about practice returns of the Steve Sarkisian-led offense against a Will Muschamp-led defense? Which side of the football will get the better of them? Boy, I'm excited to hear what that looks like, because I think, again, a lot of times you sit there and you say, yeah, I know that the points aren't given up. Texas was top 25 in turnovers the last 2 years defensively. But at points, you start letting up the confidence for an opposing team through the bend but don't break. And it just takes a matter of time before that will stays with the team rather than breaking, which is kind of how I'm viewing Steve Sarkisian and Will Muschamp pairing together.
All right. On the other side, we'll recap the press conference. We'll get to some roster moves. And we'll get to these last couple of super chats. But before we do that, let's hear from our sponsor. With the help of a couple of lifetime Longhorns, here's a word from our friends over at Advanced Pain Care.
Pros know the pain stops here.
Physical therapy helps me as an athlete then and now. And do I still need therapy? Yes. And Advanced Pain Care helps with that.
Injuries will stack up. They'll add up. You can't let those injuries get you down, and Advanced Pain Care has been very helpful for me.
We can help with whatever's got you down, from nerve damage to our spinal cord stimulator. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Same-day appointments available.
Advanced Pain Care. The pain stops here.
So, again, just to recap what Steve Sarkisian said in the press conference, those big-ticket items, Will Muschamp will not coach in the Citrus Bowl, but he was in the building yesterday. He will be around the program as an observer before he takes over on a full-time basis. Jabbar Jalouk will be with the team for the Citrus Bowl. He's been with the team as the running backs coach, replacing Chad Scott. Johnny Nansen will call the defense for the Citrus Bowl against Michigan, so everything will run through him as far as any other staff changes. Sark kind of alluded to it. We've talked about it earlier. Don't think anything's going to happen until after the bowl game. CJ, I want you to run down as we wrap this up here. Roster moves, got Trey Wisner, Jack Andrews, Trevor Gooseby. Those are really kind of the three decisions that we're still waiting on to see what those guys are going to do.
Yeah, Bobby Burton had a great breaking news earlier today. It sounds like Jack Andrews will be playing in the bowl game. That decision will come at the conclusion of the Citrus Bowl. First week of January is where we'll finally have an idea of what Jack Andrews will do. As of last night, about 7 o'clock, there was no new update on Trey Wisner. He still has all three avenues available to him: the portal, the NFL, or returning to Texas. Right now, I still slightly lean towards Texas, but there needs to be finalization on some big decisions, some conversations as well. And then Trevor Gooseby, it appears as though he is leaning back to Texas. I know our Jerry Hamilton has been all over that one as well.
All right, let's get to these last couple of super chats, CJ, before we wrap it up here. Mark B 1944, thank you for the super chat. Says same people crying about this change would be the same ones crying if the defense got steamrolled by A&M. Look, again, I just think I hate repeating myself, but CJ, I'll just go back to the well. Texas football, as it was constructed through the 2025 season, had gotten Texas to a certain point and it had plateaued. And to get to another level, you need to make changes. And you can make the argument, certainly, that the defense was trending in the wrong direction. But here's something I want to get your thoughts on. And we've talked about this here on the channel too. I think, and again, this is just me assuming based on how I think Sark thinks football. When you look at Anthony Hill departing this program to the NFL, it's a shame that you look at Anthony Hill's last year at Texas and say, man, there was some meat on the bone. Like, you didn't get all you could out of Anthony Hill. I don't think Sark wants to be sitting here a year from now saying the same thing about Colin Simmons. Like, we left some meat on the bone. We could have gotten more out of him. No, I think this is another reason. And I don't think it was any coincidence, CJ, that Sark said during the press conference that Colin Simmons, shocker, is the ideal Buck linebacker in Will Muschamp's defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's all about getting the most out of your horses. And Jeff, I know the famous quote that you, Rod, love to mention all the time. I'll let you even say it. But for the most part, I go back to when I was a kid, and I know it's always different whenever you're younger growing up, but when you first start watching football and see some of the guys on the field that make you fall in love with the sport, for me, it was around the time that Muschamp was at Texas. And I look at those defenses, and those guys were viewed from me as Titans, right? And I don't need to rehash all the names, but 12 draft picks, 10 of them in the first 4 rounds, whatever it was. I mean, those guys were fantastic. And the way that I know and the way that I get excited for what's to come is, look, Texas is recruiting more nationally now. I think they have a larger pool of talent to pick from, but I know that the development will be there. And that's getting the most out of your key guys. So for a Lance Jackson, for a Tyler Atkinson, a Bo Barnes, a Grayson Little, like it just gets me excited for what's to come with their futures under Will Muschamp.
And CJ, we'll get to this H_G209. Thank you for the super chat. Says, love PK and I trust Sark. Hope it works out. Well, hope it works out. It's not guaranteed to work out. I'm confident that it will. But CJ, I'll give Bobby Burton credit because Bobby wrote it this morning over on ontexasfootball.com, and I didn't think of it like this until I read his Friday column. But PK liked to split the differences. He's a front guy, so he liked the defensive pass game coordinator to call coverages. Terry Joseph did it, and then that responsibility fell on Dwayne Akina this last season. With Will Muschamp taking over, and this is what Sark, I think, is talking about again. We talk about a head coach of the defense, fronts, coverages, blitzes. He's going to take care of all of it. So there will be one voice on defense taking care of all of it. So you won't have to worry about, hey, is the front end tied with the back end or whatever, because there's going to be one guy responsible for it, and it's Will Muschamp. I think that's another reason why Sark made the move.
One communicator, no more can you look at it and say too many chefs in the kitchen. It's fantastic to get it all from one guy. I think it's going to be a move that pays off very quickly for Texas next year.
All right, that's going to do it for CJ and I. We're about 90 minutes away from the normal Friday live stream with Bobby Burton, Rod Babers, and Jerry Hamilton. Don't forget Sergio Kendall, special guest on the afternoon live stream. That should be about 2 hours from now when Sergio Kendall's scheduled to be live on the channel. So definitely tune in for that. CJ, thank you for the knowledge and expertise as always as you're on your way to the Metroplex. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for twisting and tweaking, doing his thing. Don't forget, if you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, we've got up to the minute portal news, roster moves, coaching moves. It's all at ontexasfootball.com. Sign up right now using the promo code OTFOG, and that'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Also, make sure that you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whether it's here on the channel or on the site, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage all year round. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and until next time, welcome.